Welcome to Cruising and Musing. I'm your host, Rob. Go ahead and click that subscribe button. Obviously, we're not cruising in a car today. We've got the recliner as our vehicle of choice, and the critters are rolling around as we observe the Storm at Sea YouTube video. Just for a backdrop, there was a shooting last Friday night in the neighborhood, and with Studio B and not having the AC working, Studio A not having the power steering and being gone, I just don't feel it would be prudent for me to roll around the hood with my windows down and me talking to myself given the current atmosphere that, things have been in the neighborhood. So I thought this would be a nice little backdrop to talk about something along these lines. Which today's topic is going to be basically teachers and the way they're treated. Um, Dr. John down at Echelon Education Consultants, he made a video, as this is wont to do on Fridays, where he talks about why I quit. And today was like showcasing Stockholm Syndrome as a reason why, some teachers quit as they find themselves to be in this Howden Stockholm Syndrome, and that it's, kind of society and themselves holding those teachers in the classroom when they know it's not good for them and when they know it's been abusive. I disagree a little bit because I feel like for Stockholm Syndrome, there's an honesty that's at play there. The monster that's holding that person captive doesn't usually pretend to be their friend. It's their roles are very plainly delineated. You have hostage, you have captive, and you have captor or hostage taker. And there's a forthrightness there of, like the captive's mind is kind of breaking itself to deal with the fact they're constantly under threat and danger. Whereas, you don't walk into your first day on the job and they tell you right off, like, hey, we're going to give you the bottom 20% of the class because you're the new teacher. And, when you need help, no one's going to be there to help you. No, they're going to walk you in, to show you your classroom. If you're lucky enough to get one, my first year of teaching, they gave me a cart, no classroom. And they wondered why the kids, treated me like no one expected. No one was going to respect me when I was the only teacher in the school that didn't have a classroom. But that's another rant. I should do my first year of teaching as a video. But, when you walk into your classroom, when you walk into your first year of teaching, there's not an openness about what it's going to be like by the time you're on your 10th year. And, your hair is now full of gray and your waist is thickened and your drive is just, completely caffeine dependent on, getting you through the day. They're not honest with you about what you're going to do. Like almost all teacher training too. They gaslight you along with these stories about all the differences you're going to make in your children's lives. And at the end of the day, like, yeah, you'll make a difference in some, but some of them are just going to make you miserable. And the rest of them probably just won't care. If I had to guess, I'd say you're making a difference in maybe 20% of those students' lives at best. The another 60%, anyone could be in the room and get the same results out of them. And the last 20%, are probably just going to decide they don't like you because of you and, would maybe be less miserable with others, but no one's going to reach them. And they don't tell you about that when you're training to be a teacher. They don't prepare you for the ugly part of being in the classroom or working with kids. They don't prepare you to have, some hyper emotional meltdown go down in your room because some 14-year-old, 15-year-old boyfriend broke up with them. They don't prepare for you to have, some 15-year-old yell at you to get off his case, you're not his dad because he's got daddy issues over dad walking out. They don't prepare you for any of that. And, it's just the tip of the iceberg. You walk in your first day, it's all smiles and everything else, new teacher training, come in, here's your class. If you need us, we're down the hall. If you ever need anything, dial this number to the office, so on and so forth. And, and they set you off and everything, is hunky-dory. The kids walk in, you're a strange person, so they're not really acting up too badly at first. I think I had an exception. I had to break up a girl fight my second day of work, which was not fun, not cool. I twisted my ankle up something awful, sliding on a pile of weave that had been pulled out by the time I got there to break it up. I was only like 4 steps away, which if you've never had to break up a girl fight, that is some next level, like kids trying to kill each other. Boys do it for show and for like respect. Girls do it for blood. But that's not here or there. We're talking about, teachers and the Stockholm Syndrome. And I just don't agree that it's Stockholm Syndrome because there's a veil pulled over your eyes when you start. I would compare it more to an abusive relationship or to there's a behavioralism practice called intermittent rewards. And we use this to train dogs, which there's the dog. Look at her. She's so alert and doing her job. But when you're training animals, you do this thing where, when you want the dog to sit, you tell them to sit when they're a puppy and you give them a treat. Then you walk along a little bit and you tell them to sit again and you give them another treat. And then you tell them to sit and you give them a treat. And once they start to expect the treat, you don't give them the treat. You give them the treat maybe every other time, then every third time, then every fourth, until eventually you're giving them the treat at random, and they're doing, and they're thinking that if they listen to you, they're going to get the treat. So they want to do it to make you happy and give them, so they get the treat. And you just never give them the treat again when they do that. And they go through the rest of their lives remembering that there was something good associated with listening to you. And they are going to just not get a treat again for doing that. But that is how you train dogs. And I hate to say it, but, that's also what you see in abusive relationships where, the abuser treats the abusee very well for, quite a while, constantly giving them positive reinforcements. And then the abuse starts, getting mixed in with the reinforcements. And then both of them kind of go absent into some sort of neglect almost. And then you start to get a mixture of abuse and reinforcement. And every time there's the abuse, yes, things are horrible, but then you have the positive reinforcement that drags them along and reminds them of what it once was, and they don't realize that that was a falsehood. And that is what I think teaching is like. Like myself, the golden image I have of teaching that I think back and I think, oh, that was so good, and it was, it was the perfect class, it was the perfect course, it was the perfect outcome. I was teaching philosophy as a throwaway course to remedial 11th graders, and I was given a class with no materials, no standards. It was like, well, just teach them philosophy, do whatever you want with it. Oh, we had so much fun. The kids learned so much. I had kids that couldn't even spell existentialism, making existential arguments with each other back and forth across the room. And they were 100% on board because I didn't make them write everything out. They just had to do like an outline of what they planned to say and get their bullet points ready. They had to take notes, and yeah, we did quizzes and whatnot. But because so much of the course was discussion-based, and we would always frame things, around a thing that was relative to them, that, they loved it. Like I would write a maxim on the board, like, lying is wrong. Or lying to kids about Santa is wrong. And we would use that to go through the entire lesson and for ethics, argue it back and forth. And by the end of the week, they would, present their arguments to the class, and we would continue on. They loved it. They learned a lot, and despite the fact that they were supposedly, the remedial behavior kids, I never had a single issue in that course. Now the honors economics kids I had in the morning, not so much. But they also didn't give me any buy-in or work with me on it. They could have had a lot more fun than they did. But I'm getting off track and on a tangent. So when I think about how good teaching could be, that's what I think back to. Whereas the norm is, well, for me, I'm not in the classroom anymore. I work online. So the norm for me is, I call the phones and I get, like half the kids are there, half the kids aren't. I'm checking in. No one's got any questions. No one needs any help. So I feel kind of useless, like a telemarketer. But at the same time, I'm not having to constantly call and get after kids for being behind, which just means I'm talking to answer machines, because once they're behind them and their parents stop talking to me, and they hide. So I have this very unrewarding task of 6 hours a day calling and leaving messages on the phones of people who don't want to talk to me while I grade papers that have been turned in blank by those same students, so they can show their parents that they turned in their work and get their video games for the weekend. That's miserable, but every now and then I grab that one student that wasn't doing well in regular school, and they rise up, and they soar. They do. And it's an intermittent reinforcement, just like I mentioned with the dogs, when you're training them to do their thing. And I suppose in the classroom that, it's very much the same. When I reflect back on my first year teaching, where I was working at a charter school and I was in the classroom, from my observation, every first year teacher walks in, everything's hunky-dory, you're greeted, oh, we're so glad to have you on the team, we're so happy to have everyone back this year. And they keep everything very upbeat. There's a word for that called toxic positivity, where no matter what's going on, they're very positive. And they'll even stay positive as they're dressing you down later on. And it'll be like, oh, well, the ceiling's coming down, and you've had 3 fights in your room that were gang-related, and we've lost 3 students to gang violence already this year. But things could be worse, so, keep your chin up and always remember that, you need to keep a smile on your face for the kids. And if you're smiling, they're smiling, and they just walk along like that's going to fix something instead of getting you proper security at the school. I've heard horror stories of people who've worked at inner city schools, so playing off of some of those there. But, so you have that toxic positivity of, you're not allowed to acknowledge when things are going bad. In my world, it always seems to work around that they invent more work for the teachers to do, and we're not allowed to act like when we object that it's going to be more work, we're not allowed to say that, it feels like. It's all about, well, you have to focus on how you're going to make it work and how things are going to be, this is going to somehow make things better instead of make things worse. And you're not allowed to harp on the negativity because you have to stay positive. And that false positivity, that, being positive in the face of something that's clearly a negative, that's toxic because it's very disingenuous and it really makes you feel played. And when you're new and you don't know better, that's what they're doing, is they're being extra super positive to you, and you just fall for it hook, line, and sinker, and you get gaslit right along into agreeing to do things and volunteering for stuff because you think you're going to have all kinds of support, and the support's not there. Your first week of teaching, you're there, and you get told that, if you need anything, you can call this person. The administrator acts like they're your buddy and everything else, and if anything ever goes wrong, so on and so forth. You meet your kids, you start doing your thing, you start, teaching the kids. End of the first 9 weeks, the kids are finally starting to get squirrely because they haven't had a decent vacation in a while. And there's the cat. And They just get going, they get worked up, and you finally have a discipline problem in your room, and you call that administrator to come down and help with the discipline problem. And when they told you to call them if you needed anything, and they'd be right there and they'd have your back, you do that, and then you find yourself Friday afternoon called down to the administrator's office during your planning period, and you're getting dressed down with a smile, with that positivity going on about how you really need to make sure that you're keeping your classroom under management, because it doesn't look very good when a teacher has to call an administrator down to take care of a problem they should be able to handle themselves, when you've pulled every trick in the book how to handle that problem, and they're supposed to be teaching you because you're a first year teacher, you're still inexperienced, and it's just not good. But they're going to keep that positivity going along to where you're not sure if you're in trouble or if you're not, and you're going to go back to your room and wonder if you just, did you just get dressed down, or did you get a pep talk? What's going on? And you're not certain, and then, like maybe it's the third 9 weeks and there's another problem, and now you get the real talking to where, they're really tearing you apart for having had two issues in your classroom all year long. And, all the truth comes out of, how they are not there to support you. They expect to never hear from you. They don't want to hear from you. They're not interested in hearing from you. They're not there to help you. They're there to hold you to account and evaluate you. And, God forbid if they walk in and you don't have that objective written on the board. It doesn't matter how good the lesson's going or anything else. You can't pass your evaluation without the objective being written on the board. And other craziness like that. And this is where it starts to turn into that emotional abuse of, now you're always going to be there with all those classes, and you'll have the normal going, and you'll occasionally have the good class, but you'll constantly be working underneath that insecurity of administration just ain't being straight with you about what they expect from you or what they think of you. And now you're constantly looking for that nudge of approval, that sign that you're doing the job they want you to do. And it constantly kind of rolls down again. And it's just, like I said before, it's very, like that intermittent reward. It's very gaslighty. It's very twisty, especially when they start acting like you're the problem instead of the kid being the problem. This child hasn't done any work this semester. Why aren't you making this child do their work? How can they learn if they're not doing the work? And you're like, I have done everything except physically put a pencil in this child's hand and move his hand to try to get him to do the work. And you can't. But they're going to keep putting that on you. And then it's going to happen in the parent-teacher conference, too, where you walk in, and the administrator acts like they have your back on it. And then you get in there and you sit down and you're across from this angry parent, and all of a sudden that administrator is on the parent side and everything's on you, and you have all three of them, parent, administrator, and student, acting like the student's behavior is your fault and not the student's problem. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So that's really why I, make the expression that being a teacher, especially a teacher in a classroom, is an exercise in that resiliency in the face of emotional abuse. Because not only are you going through all of that, but you also got to be tough enough to ignore all the bullshit coming out of the kids day after day. Because even the ones that adore you are not going to make up for the ones that walk in and look at you and say something crappy about the way you look, sit down, and act like it's nothing. And if you do anything more than like give them a verbal reprimand, like you try to send them up to the dean or administration, now we're back to square one where administration doesn't want to hear from you, they don't want to help you, and they don't want to back you up. Unlike everything what they told you when you first signed in. This also goes into the teacher pay thing I've talked about before, where you go in and you sit down and they show you the nice schedule of all your pay increases and all the new benefits that you unlock at certain years in. The reason that everything is staggered out like that is it gives you an incentive, a little carrot at the end, to stay on one more year. Oh, 2 more years and I get this. Another year and I'll get this. And then you get that sunk cost fallacy going in of, well, I've got 10 years in already. If I try to go to somewhere else, I'm going to have to start over at the bottom of the ladder. And then, the state will do something like they did in Hawaii and here in Florida, where you were worried about leaving your job because you'd have to start over at the bottom of the ladder, and then they rip the bottom of the pay scale all the way up and put it on scale with where the tenure teachers are. And it's like, well, what did you just, endure all the bullshit for the last 10 years because you didn't want to start over for? You're now on the same pay scale as a brand new teacher. And it goes forward from there. It's one of those reoccurring cycles. And you can never really quite get ahead. And it's all designed around the idea of getting you to do that investment in the time and in the... It's about getting you to do that investment of time and put yourself into it to where you don't want to back out of it because it becomes your identity in part. And then it also becomes that sunk cost investment of time into the system where you're trying to earn those extra benefits back to you. And really becomes that issue of, again, they're stringing you along, you're getting the intermittent rewards, and, you're trying to stick with it because you want to get your retirement, you want to get your pension, you want to get to the where you're making the big money because there's always that big money boost at like year 15. And you're just getting strung along. And as well as I do, you're going to get to year 14 if the big money's at 15. And they're going to do like a pay freeze for 3 or 4 years there. And, then you're waiting. And then by the time you do get to the year 15, they've made some sort of change and you're not getting what you signed up for when you started. You're going to get half of it and another half of it at year, like, say, 15. Or, 16, 17. Or all of a sudden part of this is performance pay and they do the bait and switch. And if it was done in any other profession, you would have like an OSHA case rock solid. But there's so many carve-outs for them to do this sort of stuff to teachers that, it's just ridiculous. And that is why I disagree that this being a teacher is not like Stockholm Syndrome so much. It's more like being in this abusive relationship. And I have to say the most manipulative part of it all is the do it for the children bit. Because you will find yourself every waking moment of every waking day, when you've already given 100%, being asked to give another 5 to 10%, and being said, do it for the children. And when you look back, you'll realize that they got almost a second job out of you for free for do it for the children. And when you look at the children, the children won't even do something for you as simple as pushing the chairs in their desk when they go to leave the room so you don't have to do it before you can go home. They won't do something as simple as pick up after themselves. Pick up their wrappers, throw their trash in the garbage. They won't do something as simple as put the papers in the basket when they leave. But you're going to do for them. My personal favorite was I was once asked to create extra credit assignments for a student who had a 20F in my class because he wanted to try to pass, or his mom wanted him to try to pass. But apparently him doing the work I had already assigned wasn't an option because he didn't like those assignments. And that administrator I told you about, that was all, hunky-dory, we're here to help you. This was my first year teaching. Decided that they were going to make me do that. So I had to sit down and do lesson plans and create extra assignments for this kid to do that he then turned around and didn't do anyways. Thank God I have the administrator I have now, whose solution to the problem would be to make the kid go back and do his late work, and I would not be required to give him full credit for something that was months late when he did it like that. So again, like, I've been very fortunate, but I know there's teachers out there who have had, like the experience I had my first year. Like, that would be the high point, and it's been downhill from there, and they've been chasing back after it. So, again, this is why I refer to it as that resilience in the face of endless emotional abuse, and more like a abusive co-relationship, or being a dog that's being trained with intermittent rewards, more so than Stockholm Syndrome. I feel like Stockholm Syndrome at least acknowledges your personhood, whereas this other treatment that goes on doesn't really manage to hit you on that level, because it almost feels like you're constantly questioning whether you're good enough, because the expectations are always there and always high, and they're always looking for more from you. Whereas, at least with Stockholm Syndrome, the only thing they're really looking for is for you to cooperate. And that's not even what they want now. Like, we've all been there where the administrator says they want something done in the morning, and when you do it in the afternoon, you get yelled at for doing it because they're not looking for cooperation. They're looking for obedience. And it's just a mess. So, yeah, that's my take on it, I think. Dr. John, let me know what you think. Anyone else, please feel free to leave a comment down below. We're still looking for those 50 subscribers. So thank you in advance.